On the following day, Carmen realized that the vision of the desert described in popular journals had little in common with the grim reality. She had expected cracked earth, a pale sun, amaranthine sands, and a menacing heat from the sky. Indeed, she received these gifts. But the desert had more in store, even if a person was no longer capable of accepting any more of its offerings. Driven by the furious wind, they marched among wandering dunes that shaped the horizon's boundaries. As she walked onward, Carmen observed the astonishing nature around her. She felt as if the sands were moving like travelers heading toward a temple. From a distance, these undulating stretches of land resembled the shifting parts of some giant creature. Several times that day, she wondered why this phenomenon in the distance never crossed their path, as if the creature kept its distance like a predator, waiting for its prey to look away. But Carmen never looked away, carefully watching the deadly spectacle of wind and red sand. She not only had to face these surreal shapes, but also came to understand what the desert's lament truly was: the chirping, unbearable sound produced by the wind forcing its way into cracks in the ground. Sometimes it sounded like the wailing of a dying child in the distance, other times like the whistling of an old, useless machine. There were moments when one could swear they heard whispers approaching, surrounding, embracing, and suffocating them. A few times the red-haired woman hissed in shock, almost certain that some being had brushed its fingers against her neck and whispered in a half-voice,
"Turn back, or you will die as we have died."
But there was no one who could have spoken those ghostly, vile words, because the Nameless One hadn't uttered a single word during their entire journey. He was focused on not losing his sense of time and place. He knew that this treacherous land was full of dangers, where not only the lack of water, violent sandstorms, and extreme temperatures posed threats. The greatest danger was a weak mind subjected to subtle, almost invisible tests. It started with whispers, voices, pleas, and commands, and more often than not, it ended in madness. Here, mirages could take on real shapes, as if all the magic of the world had flowed through the stone channels of the empire and filled the desert landscape to its very edges. The deaths of adventurers had caused this great power to rot, creating a living nightmare. Even the frying pans, pots, and other gear hanging from the sides of the wooden cart produced unbearable noises, adding more somber hues to this evil-saturated palette. But perhaps it was human nature that saw and heard only what it wanted to see and hear. Perhaps there was no evil or malevolence here, and it was simply the human tendency to label things they knew best. Maybe the gods didn't want to prevent mortals from crossing this thorny path to discover paradise. Many questions swirled in Carmen's mind during the journey. She had to entertain herself somehow, and without a companion to talk to, she contemplated the philosophical aspects of her wanderings. She always had a head full of ideas, and eagerly absorbed information, curiosities, and technological innovations from around the world. But this time, she couldn't count on the miracles of the human world or the magic of witches. Surrounded by the omnipresent red sand, she began to doubt her mission and conjure up various scenarios of her own suffering. Yet even two powerful storms that swept through the lands they traveled didn't trigger a conversation, as if both of them were afraid to break the silence. There were no quarrels or intimate exchanges during the first night. They only opened their mouths late in the afternoon, when even the wandering dunes on the horizon seemed to have settled into slumber. It was precisely what happened on the monstrous ridges that prompted Carmen to instinctively retreat under her cart. It was then that she saw black dots on the sleeping dunes, resembling flies frozen in time. Looking closer, she noticed that these undefined things had elongated shapes, like brush strokes. At first, there were only a few of them, but over time, their numbers grew, forming clusters. Studying them with curiosity and caution, Carmen tried to match these contours to something familiar. Finally, this difficult task led her to a terrifying discovery. The traveler realized that the slender strips fluttering in the wind resembled human silhouettes, though with somewhat disproportionate limbs. She felt as though these mysterious figures were staring directly at her.
It's impossible.
Carmen whispered nervously to herself.
The desert is lifeless. No one should be out there.
And there is no one.
The nameless one replied calmly, having heard her doubts as he peeked under the cart.
But there.
She pointed toward the last rays of the sun.
Someone is there. I can still see them.
There is no one there.
He repeated in a calm, neutral voice, extending his hand toward the frightened girl.
So I'm losing my mind?
No, it's something much scarier.
A few simple yet firm gestures from the nameless one convinced Carmen to stop playing hide-and-seek. Shivering, she sat by the campfire, still carefully watching the dark lines on the horizon. It became harder and harder to track them as the darkness began to dominate the sky.
They are banshees.
Her companion informed her.
Banshees? I've never heard of them. I've read many journals and spoken to several travelers in person, but no one ever mentioned banshees.
And no one ever will.
Why not?
For those who perished in the great desert, chasing their unrealistic dreams, banshees are the last thing they see in their wretched lives. For those who regain their sanity and return to the safety of civilization, banshees are a symbol of their madness. No one dares admit that they saw figures in a lifeless land. The world, the empire would consider such a person insane. So those who survived convinced themselves that it was merely a hallucination of their minds. And since no one dared to describe it, every adventurer believes they alone saw it, they alone heard it, they alone experienced it.
So everyone just keeps it to themselves? That's foolish.
Wouldn't you have kept it to yourself if I wasn't here? How did you react? What did you feel?
I was terrified. I panicked like never before. It was irrational, and that's exactly what I don't understand.
And perhaps those who survive don't want to remember their irrational behavior. They want to be remembered as brave adventurers who return to life. No one wants to be labeled as a madman.
Maybe you're right.
Carmen admitted, still breathing heavily but gradually calming down, finding solace in the sight of the dancing flames.
But I still don't know who or what the banshees are.
It's hard to explain.
Try. After all, you seem to know what they are.
Those figures, they both exist and don't. They're like something suspended between life and death. They are the desert, its voice and form.
Are they ghosts?
Don't reduce them to such a meager role, because they aren't dead, as they never truly existed. They're echoes. Everything the great desert represents is embodied in them. The further we travel into the desert, the more banshees we'll encounter until our paths eventually cross. And when that happens, no matter what you hear, no matter what you feel, never look them directly in the eyes.
Why?
People say the eyes are the mirrors of the soul. Perhaps there's a grain of truth in that, because beings that were never born have no souls, and their eyes are empty. And the world abhors emptiness. Everything seeks to be filled. If you look them in the eyes, your soul will no longer be yours. According to legend, the banshees are, in fact, cursed people who dared to look into the void of the desert. Now they are its slaves. They are its voice.
But you said you've never been to the desert.
I haven't.
Then how do you know all this?
When a man travels across the world, he can learn many things, not all of them pleasant. You just need to know how to listen between the lines. And so, I'll repeat my request. Abandon this journey and return to civilization. This is truly a wicked place.
I can't.
She replied with sadness in her voice.
You can't? Or maybe you just don't want to.
I simply can't give up.
Why?
The nameless one was curious about her determination. She was stubborn, full of hope. She reminded him of someone he once knew. That person also carried that spark of action. She was like a candle, stubbornly shining amidst the greatest storm a person could imagine. Yet the man was aware that every light eventually goes out, just as one of those beautiful sources of light had faded many years ago.
I see our world.
Carmen's answer pulled him from his grim reverie.
I see it declining. We're dying along with it. But I believe that behind this curtain of darkness, there's hope. There's life. We just have to find it.
And what will happen when you find that valley? Will the world become a better place?
There will be a change. We can't expect anything to change if we don't do something to make it happen.
Do you think you'll be the one to find change for the world? Don't you think it's a bit selfish to believe that one person, one valley, could alter human nature and save the entire civilized world?
I don't know that. All I know is that if we don't try, we'll never find it. We'll never give the world a chance to change.
The man laughed, trying to resist commenting on Carmen's naive words. His view of her was increasingly that of a child stumbling through the fog rather than an adult woman. However, when he saw the approaching banshees, the ones they had been talking about, he grew serious.
We'll have to put our little argument aside for now.
Why? What's happening?
No matter what happens around you, no matter what you hear or feel, do not open your eyes. Don't respond. Don't move. Be like the desert. Be seemingly dead. You're about to meet the banshees.
He said in a tone that sent chills down her spine, assuming a meditative posture himself. For a moment longer, Carmen watched her companion in this misery as he focused his mind and body, attempting to transform, in her view, into a lone rock on the desert sands. Swallowing her fear and curiosity, she closed her eyes and concentrated her entire mind on her breathing. She repeated in her thoughts like a mantra that under no circumstances should she open her eyes, just as the Nameless One had instructed. After several seconds, which felt endlessly long to the unaccustomed Carmen, the desert arrived. The desert came first with sounds resembling the fluttering of leaves falling from the last living tree in the capital. Carmen imagined herself as a little girl, standing at the foot of the ancient tree enclosed in a glass tomb. Every year, on the 21st day of the last month, she would sneak out of her house to make her own pilgrimage and watch as the rust, purple, black, and green leaves detached themselves from the nearly dried-out branches, dancing in the air before settling on the ground. With each passing year, there were fewer of these swirling dancers who always managed to astonish the young observer. Initially, there were thousands, like stars in the sky. Their flight resembled a colorful rain of hues and shapes, but as time passed, that number dwindled, first to hundreds, then to dozens, until teenage Carmen could encompass all the performers of this once grand spectacle with her gaze. It seemed to her that she was the only one who noticed that as the tree withered, so did the world. That thought of impending death took hold of the present Carmen as she heard the approaching steps of the mysterious banshees. The fluttering, which at first sounded gentle, gradually became more distinct until it resembled the snapping of dry branches underfoot. She heard the cracking as if the sand lamented under the pressure of these dark entities. Their steps were quick, uncoordinated. The behavior of these figures resembled nothing the young woman had ever read or heard about. She felt that the banshees were simultaneously approaching her and moving away, as if the entire space of the campsite was both shrinking and stretching like a spring. Even the fire, which loudly consumed the branches, seemed to be in several places at once. The air around Carmen felt at times thin, as if she were atop the tallest building in the capital, and at other times dense, as if smoke from a fire had engulfed her and her surroundings. She could clearly hear the figures whispering to each other in a language she did not understand and rummaging through her belongings left on the cart. Pots clanged against each other, water sloshed in the containers, and the wooden frame of the cart creaked, bending under a force no human could comprehend. Yet all these sounds were nothing compared to the voice that resonated with dark notes in the mind of the not-so-brave traveler.
Isabel, Isabel, is that you?
She heard a voice that sounded like her father's, calling out to his deceased wife, her mother. At the same time, she smelled the faint scent of men's cologne, so characteristic of Adam Phoenix that she jumped up in panic and stood at attention. Then something touched the bare skin of her neck. It wasn't the eerie touch of a terrifying phantom. No, it was something far more insidious. Fingertips gently brushed her neck and, traveling along the underside of her jaw, moved closer to her lips. There was nothing sexual in this act. As a little child, she had often been greeted this way by her father, who would sneak up from behind while she was playing, gently stroke her, and as he neared her childish lips, he would lift and toss her in the air, always eliciting unrestrained laughter. This time, there was no laughter. She didn't know how to react. Should she run, hide under the cart, or try once more to ignore her surroundings, just as the Nameless One had commanded? The decision was difficult, and even the lack of one carried consequences. But the vengeful hand of fate demanded a choice.
My dearest, my most beautiful.
She heard her father's voice again, speaking to his deceased wife, his voice trembling with emotion.
I searched for you so long. I conducted so many studies. I knew I'd find you here. They called me mad, but I knew the truth. On this desert, the dead truly walk. There is no heaven and no hell. There is no life and no death. There is only existence here and there.
Adam, my love, you've finally come.
Suddenly the air filled with a beautiful voice. One didn't need to be a prophet to know that this charming, sweet sound belonged to Isabel Phoenix, Adam's beloved.
Open your eyes, my darling, and we'll be together again.
Yes, my dearest. I am with you once more.
And where is my sweet daughter, Carmen?
Carmen shivered upon hearing her name spoken in her late mother's voice. She had the feeling that these beings, spirits, phantoms, whatever they were watching her alone, deceiving her with their deceptively sweet words.
Oh, sweet Isabel, Carmen will come to us when the time is right. She will challenge the desert and find us. She will give everything to join us. She will open her eyes and see us. She'll see that there is no death, there is no madness. There's only misunderstanding, but she'll overcome it. She will be with us, here, forever.
Carmen, my sweet daughter. Carmen, open your heart and eyes. Join us. After all these years of separation, smile at us.
Mom?
Carmen gave in to the allure and spoke. Instantly, she felt numerous hands touching her skin.
Yes, my darling, I am with you again.
Her mother answered in a gentle, loving voice.
Join us, sweetheart,
Added her father.
Yes, I miss you both so much, I long for you.
It's time to break the chains that divide us. Time for you to come home.
Adam declared, his voice warm and soothing.
Return to us. Return to the happiest moments of your life.
Mom? Dad?
Carmen wanted to return to the days of her youth, to her childhood. Back then, the world seemed beautiful, despite its grayness. To a small child, the world was almost endless, grand, powerful, and magnificent, just like her parents. They were wise, kind-hearted, and caring. She wanted to turn back time and stop it in the moment when everything was still simple and safe. She had a feeling that if she opened her eyes, that seemingly impossible wish might come true. It felt like a mirage, but here, on this cursed land, anything seemed possible. Slowly, she spread her arms as if wanting to embrace the whole world, as if preparing to return to what she had lost. Feeling the warm, gentle touch that reminded her of her parents, she made a decision to open her eyes, to open her heart. She didn't manage to open her eyes when a brutal force pinned her to the ground. Pain shot through her chest and up to her throat, and the only trace of that brief episode was an unfamiliar weight. It took several long moments for her to realize that it was the man who had stopped her, pressing her into the cold sand and covering her eyes with his rough, scarred hand.
I told you not to react to the sounds around you.
he said in a disappointed tone.
You were this close to joining the long list of unfortunate souls devoured by the desert. Are you sure you're ready for this journey?
After those few bitter words, he released her from his grip. Trembling like jelly, Carmen sat up, leaning against the wooden wheel of the cart. She was afraid to open her eyes, but she finally conquered her fear. All she saw was the man sitting there in his cowboy hat, calmly smoking a pipe. He was the only one nearby, looking so majestic, as if contemplating the meaning of life. There was no sign of the phantoms called Banshee. The nameless one met her gaze, his dark pupils blended with the nightscape stretching out behind him. Carmen felt like she was staring into a piece of the sky captured within his eyes.
I warned you about the desert.
He spoke, his voice carrying a threatening undertone.
I don't say things I don't mean.
I thought,
Nothing you want to say matters right now. I'm not interested in what you saw or heard. It wasn't real, so keep that cruel suffering to your heart. No one should reveal themselves so easily to a stranger.
so what was it?
She asked, still uncertain.
A lie you wanted to hear, a lie that wanted to consume you, a lie that tried to take you from this world. Nothing more, nothing less. It was simply the desert.
I thought I was stronger.
Everyone thinks that until they find themselves in the arms of the great desert. Perhaps now is the time to turn back. Don't you think?
Carmen felt an inner unease as she realized she was ready to agree with his suggestion. But she swallowed her fear, forced down the bitter saliva, and looked around the camp. Then she fixed her gaze on the black canvas of the sky, trying to glimpse the edge of the desert. In that moment, she swore, in the name of her deceased parents, that she would not rest until she saw the end of this hell.
No,
She replied with conviction.
I won't change my mind. I know there's a valley beyond this desert, and nothing will stop me from seeing it. Maybe today I lost to the desert, but I'm still alive. That won't break me.
Her companion smirked sarcastically upon hearing her answer.
Get some sleep, because something tells me that the pale sun of tomorrow will be a fiercer opponent than usual.
We'll see about that tomorrow. Good night.
The girl crawled back under the cart, where her makeshift bed was, but before she fully hid, she turned to her, what she considered, knight, and said, knowing he'd react unfavorably to her tease.
Thank you for saving my life. And my soul. Maybe one day I'll be able to save yours.
With those words, she bid farewell to her savior, who sat by the dying fire for a few moments longer, surprised by her statement. But he couldn't delay sleep any further, knowing that in just a few hours he'd once again begin the arduous journey through the scorching sands of this blood-red land that knows no mercy.